play a video game, you experience it as a seamless whole, unless it was made by EA, in which case you experience it as an initial seamless whole that costs $80, and then 3 additional seamless holes that cost $20 each. But while a video game might seem like a polished and coherent experience, behind the scenes there are all sorts of tricks, fudges, and marvels of digital jury rigging to make the thing actually function as expected. And once you start to notice these tricks, you'll notice them everywhere. Just like the commenters who suggested the following 7 developer tricks that you can't unsee in the comments on our previous video. Enjoy, and beware spoilers ahead for your future enjoyment of cutscenes involving anyone's hands.
Do you ever marvel at how perfect your timing is in video games? About how you always seem to hit jump just at the last second, giving yourself the maximum possible distance? Is it perhaps the skill you're proudest of in this world? I may have some bad news for you. That's because you may well be being assisted by a developer trick known affectionately as Coyote Time, the clever ploy suggested by many commenters on our original video, including Zarnox, Lawyer, and Ziera. Coyote Time is named after Wile E. Coyote from the Roadrunner cartoons, who famously had the ability to hang in the air for a few seconds after running off a cliff before tumbling thousands of feet into a canyon and shattering all his bones. You know, the funny cartoons for kids. Anyway, Coyote Time in games refers to the tiny grace period that some games give you where you are no longer on a platform but you're still able to jump, saving yourself from a painful fall and making you feel like an awesome god of impeccable timing into the bargain. That's because you always feel like you jumped at the very last possible moment, an impressive skill that, we're sorry, may actually be based on a complex web of technological lies. But what isn't these days? Enjoy it, I say.
Ooh, something smells good. For me, I hope.
It is. Courtesy of Kenneth.
Oh, my thanks. These birds are needy creatures. They don't like me running after the fat chocobo behind their backs.
In our original video on the subject, we took a look at how, when it comes time for an in-game item to be handed between characters, you regularly get a camera angle showing the exchange taking place, but not the actual item or hands involved, as if the thing was taken from and placed into an unseen pocket.
Take it. To remember him by.
Better ring? Thank you. Thank you.
You better hope it's an unseen pocket. Back then, we focused on how this trick saves developers the time and effort of realistically animating the human hand, which, as we all know, is a complicated bony flesh spider that is impossible to draw, much less animate. Look at them, seriously. However, a number of commenters chimed in with a more substantial reason developers shy away from showing this stuff. Such as Zach Hickson Tutorials, thanks for your comment, who says, the difficulty with handing over items isn't really the hand animation being hard to do, although hands will always be a challenge, but more to do with the fact that reparenting an object is difficult to do correctly. In order to have an object move with the hand, you need to parent the object to the bone used to animate the hand, which will automatically calculate the offset when the hand is moved so you don't have to. Problem is, when that object suddenly needs to be parented to the other person's hand, the offset calculation needs to be switched over. Since the offset is calculated based on 2 extremely different reference points, this might end up with the object teleporting across the map instead of into the other hand, and is tricky to get right. Tricky to get right, and easy to solve, of course, by simply not showing the handover.
Had to take a detour into the quarry, but I found plenty. Here.
We will start HRA production immediately. I promised I'd tell you about Dylan once you helped us.
Commenter Taurin Fox, again thanks for your comment, adds, "It's a difficult thing to do even in production animation and can be impossible in some game engines. A simple solution is to have a copy of the object linked to both characters, the visibility of each can be toggled, and the handoff hidden by the camera angle to avoid visual inconsistencies." So there you have it. Next time you see an out-of-frame item handover, you'll know that some developer was saved a massive headache. I just can't stop thinking about hands now. Ugh.
Scabbard might sound like a medieval insult, but in fact it's an essential part of any adventurer's kit, in that it's a sheath for you to carry your sword around with you without cutting yourself all the time, like a total scabbard. Drawing a sword from a scabbard on the hip is fairly straightforward, providing you manage to not cut your own head off. But what if you're wearing your scabbard on your back, like video game heroes Link from Smash Bros. Or Geralt from The Witcher tend to do? Why not try it yourself at home? Reach behind you, grab an imaginary sword, and see how far you think you could get it out of a scabbard. Far enough so it would actually come out? Probably not. For an even clearer example, check out this Link cosplayer, Sakigake_cos, who went viral for this video in which he attempted the feat himself. Looks like Ganon's getting off easy today. That's why generally developers tend to fudge the physical impossibility of these characters ever actually drawing their sword by having the sword clip through the scabbard. Generally, the animation is so quick and the player's attentions are so focused elsewhere, most likely on the enemies that they're attacking, that no one notices that their sword just phased through solid matter like Kitty Pryde when she's late for a class at the School for Gifted Mutants. Super Smash Bros. Creator Masahiro Sakurai commented on this phenomenon after seeing the previously mentioned Link cosplay clip, pointing out that the Smash Bros. Animators had tried to make Link's sword sheathing a little more realistic by having him pull the scabbard downwards before the sword enters it. But even then, it's still not quite legit and requires a bit of clipping for it to work properly. Maybe consider a shorter sword in future Link. Or maybe a gun! Hey Nintendo, you should be writing this down.
There's something inherently dishonourable about killing someone when their back is turned, something truly cowardly about not giving your opponent time to react for a fair fight. Except when I'm doing it, obviously, in which case it's totally fine. And even, I'd suggest, heroic. Video game developers seem to have realised that it's not much fun for you, the precious special player, to get jumped when you're unable to defend yourself. That's why you'll see what's known as unit slotting, where enemies in games like Assassin's Creed politely line up and wait their turn to stab you. As a British person, this amount of queuing in one scene pleases me greatly. Some developers take this a step further though, with a smart variation on unit slotting that takes into account where the player is looking, as detailed by Zarnox. Related to unit slotting, prioritising enemies that are on screen over ones that aren't. That way it doesn't feel unfair because you were killed by something from behind that you didn't know was there. Take Doom 2016, the expertly optimised first-person shooter that includes this type of enemy prioritisation, allowing the enemies that are directly in front of you to jump the queue and attack first. This has the dual benefit of making you feel in the thick of the action, and also prevents you from getting sucker punched from behind by an imp or something. I imagine Doom Guy is entirely covered in blood on the front and entirely clean on the back, like a sort of blood-glazed donut. If you learn to spot this technique, you can also learn to take advantage of it, as commenter Some Adventure Time fan explained. I abused this feature on Devil May Cry 5 to beat it on the hardest difficulty along with Bloody Palace. I would purposely rotate the camera so only one or two enemies were on screen, made it a lot easier. Now I understand why Dante's coat is red. No blood-glazed donuts here.
No! No, 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 no! Hey? Off?
Reflections have always been a pain in the butt for video game developers. There you are, using all the graphical horsepower of your console or PC just to make a realistic looking scene, and then some clever designer decides to put something shiny in the scene, like a car. All of a sudden, everything in that scene needs to be reflected and distorted by multiple surfaces, potentially exponentially increasing the amount of processing power required to render it. Can't these video game characters just walk or something?
Oh my god!
Why put a car in a game? Ruins every game it's in.
I can't believe you're doing this!
The most powerful modern graphics cards are now at the level where they can render these reflections entirely accurately via ray tracing, literally tracing rays of light so that they behave entirely realistically. Before that, reflections tended to be cheated using various techniques, and sometimes wouldn't even run at the same frame rate as the rest of the game. I'm starting to think the problem here is cars.
Someone stop this man!
But what happens when you come across the most reflective surface of all, a mirror? Well, developers had a trick for that too that could recreate seemingly perfect reflections, as mentioned by Tom Sharp. I love the mirror trick developers use to simulate a working mirror, which is to just have the player control a model in a flipped environment, but in reverse. Yet, rather than meticulously recreating the trajectory of photons with all the millions of calculations that would require, lots of games just created a reversed version of the level behind an impassable window and stuck a copy of the player model in there, allowing for crisp, almost pixel-perfect reflections. Assuming weird stuff didn't happen, like the character's gun clipping out into the real world.
Damn, I'm looking good.
I think we've had quite enough out of you, Duke Nukem. The other benefit to this technique is that in a horror game you could start doing some weird stuff where the reflection no longer matches the real world in order to freak the player out, like in Silent Hill 3. Ugh, mirrors. Even worse than cars.
Look, I'll take it. If I were to ask you what the most famous 3D shooter was, you might reasonably say the original Doom, at which point I'd loudly and smugly proclaim that you'd fallen into my trap. And then you'd probably leave. And I'd be alone again. The thing is, while Doom appears to be a 3D shooter, it's not actually a true 3D engine, just a very clever 2D one, as pointed out by a viewer whose username is either Confron7A7Eon7 or Confrontationed. My favourite trick is how the original Doom games looked 3D despite the games being entirely 2D. If you're wondering how this pseudo 3D effect works, and works so effectively, it's via a technique known as Raycasting, which does make it sound a little bit like a wizard did it. In fact, it's just a clever programming workaround, and I suppose, in his own way, John Carmack is a sort of wizard. Each map in Doom was designed as a 2D layout, but by casting rays from the player position in the direction they were facing, the game calculated the location of vertical lines along with height information, which was used to create a space that looked three-dimensional. It's a smart, fast way to create the illusion of 3D space, but it did have some drawbacks. Your line of sight always had to be parallel to the floor, walls always had to be perpendicular to the floor and ceiling, and crucially, there was no way to have multi-level structures with rooms visible above other rooms. There's a reason Doom wasn't set in Tokyo, put it that way. Later raycasting engines, like the Build engine used for Duke Nukem 3D, managed to fudge their way around some of these limitations, allowing for sloped surfaces, for example. But when you looked up and down, things still looked weird and distorted. You can see the difference here. Duke Nukem 3D was remade for its 20th anniversary in a true 3D engine, where it looks considerably less nauseating than the original. Not the most nauseated I've been playing a Duke Nukem game though. Let me show you that.
No, what am I doing?
What do you think? I'm alone again, aren't I?
But right now, you need rest. So sleep. Please sleep.
all have our own unique ways of sleeping. Some of us sleep on our front, some of us sleep on our back, and some of us sleep face down on our keyboards after staying up until 3 AM trying to think of a good joke for this segment.
Still nothing, huh?
No. Typically, the thing that unites most sleeping people on the planet is that they tend to sleep under some sort of covering, whether to stay warm or preserve their modesty. Not so with video game characters, who regularly hop right onto the top of the bed, sometimes with their shoes on. I'm looking at you, Skiff from Stalker 2. You're going to get mud, radiation, and probably a little bit of bandit brains all over the sheet. It's a surprisingly regular thing though. Characters in everything from Final Fantasy to Animal Crossing to Life is Strange are out here sleeping on top of perfectly serviceable bedding.
Stop!
They didn't even put a blanket on him in the hospital. Maybe the blanket was an extra $1,000 and his insurance wouldn't cover it. Of course, the real reason games don't show characters climbing in and out from under the blankets is that cloth physics are extremely difficult to render realistically, as identified by commenter Starlit Alpha. I've got you one. Characters don't sleep under covers/sheets for the same reason they don't change clothes on screen. One of the few exceptions to this is Deadly Premonition of all games. Deadly Premonition, eh? Let's check it out. Oh wow, so that's where all the development time, effort and resources went. Well, that's a wrap on the 7 developer tricks that once you've seen, you can't unsee, courtesy of the commenters on our previous video on the subject. Thanks for your comments. If you would like to watch another video from Outside Xbox, and I heartily recommend them, and I'm not biased, there's this one from Outside Xbox, or a little cheeky alternative here, there's a video from Outside Extra. They make one of them every single week, as do we, and so it's a goodbye from me, and a goodbye from these hands.
Still there.
These bony flesh spiders, they still here. Yeah, bye!
Go away.
Whee!